Greetings, this is Makuto. Today we're exploring a phenomenon that's taken the world by storm: podcasts. In recent years, these digital audio shows have skyrocketed in popularity, attracting massive investments. But with such rapid growth comes an important question. Are we experiencing a podcast market bubble? Is the value attached to this booming industry inflated? And if so, what does that mean for investors and enthusiasts alike? Join me as we delve into the fascinating world of podcasts and their market bubble. Podcasts have been around since the early 2000s, but their popularity has skyrocketed in the past decade. This audio medium, initially viewed as a niche market, has blossomed into a full-fledged industry that has disrupted traditional radio and even television broadcasting. In the early days, podcasting was a tech enthusiast's hobby. It was a platform for sharing knowledge, opinions, and stories, mostly among a small group of dedicated listeners. However, the launch of Apple's podcast app in 2005 gave this medium a significant boost, making podcasts accessible to a broader audience. The app's arrival opened up a new realm of entertainment, education, and information for millions of people worldwide. Just a few years later, in 2014, the game changed again with the release of Serial, a riveting true crime podcast that quickly became a cultural phenomenon. This show demonstrated the storytelling potential of podcasts and attracted a new wave of listeners and creators. Following these milestones, the podcast landscape began to flourish. Major platforms such as Spotify and Google jumped on the bandwagon, investing heavily in podcast creation and distribution. This wave of investment led to a surge in the number of podcasts available, with shows covering a diverse range of topics, from business and politics to comedy and fiction. The podcast industry's growth didn't stop there. The recent pandemic accelerated the rise of podcasts as people turned to this medium in their search for entertainment, information, and connection during lockdowns. Home studios sprouted up around the globe, and the number of podcast episodes exploded. Today there are over 2 million podcasts available worldwide, a clear testament to their growing popularity. This rapid rise might seem like a success story, and it is, in many ways. However, as we'll see in the next scene, this boom has also led to some concerning trends in the podcast market. But that's a story for another time. For now, let's just marvel at the meteoric rise of this fascinating medium. As podcasts have gained traction, they've also attracted significant investments. It's not just a few coins tossed into the wishing well, we're talking about big bucks here. In the past few years, we've seen corporations, celebrities, and even tech giants dipping their toes in the podcast market. Companies like Spotify, Apple, and Amazon have been investing heavily in podcasting. They are not just buying up smaller podcasting companies, but also commissioning original content. Spotify, for instance, has spent over $500 million on podcast-related acquisitions just in 2020, and it's not stopping there. The company plans to continue investing hundreds of millions more over the next few years. On the other hand, Apple, another major player, has been focusing on creating exclusive content for its podcast platform. Then there are celebrities like Oprah Winfrey and the Obamas who have signed multi-million-dollar podcast deals. These high-profile endorsements have only served to skyrocket the value of the podcast market. But it's not just the big names. Venture capitalists are also showing interest. According to a report by PitchBook, venture capital investment in podcast companies reached a record high of over $200 million in 2020. All these investments are a clear indicator of the increasing value of the podcast market. But the question remains, the podcast market is undeniably booming, but is it sustainable? The answer to that, my friends, we'll explore in our next segment. Despite the impressive growth in investments, some experts argue that the podcast market is overvalued and potentially a bubble. Now, what do we mean by a market bubble? Well, it's when the prices of assets increase rapidly to levels significantly above their intrinsic value. The rise is usually fueled by exuberant market behavior. When the bubble bursts, prices plummet, often causing significant financial loss for investors. So, why do some believe the podcast market fits this description? Let's delve into that. Firstly, the rapid increase in the number of podcasts and listeners has led to a surge in investment, driving up the perceived value of the market. It's not uncommon to see companies throwing millions, even billions, into podcast-related ventures. But here's the catch. Despite the growth, the podcast industry's revenue remains relatively small compared to other media sectors. This discrepancy between the market's perceived value and its actual profitability could be an indicator of overvaluation. Secondly, the podcast market's growth has been largely driven by the influx of big players like Apple, Spotify, and Google. These giants have the resources to weather a market downturn, but what about the smaller players? If the market contracts, it could spell disaster for them. Finally, the podcast market is somewhat reminiscent of the dot-com bubble in the late 90s. Back then, the internet was the new frontier, and companies were investing heavily in it, similar to what we're seeing in the podcast market today. However, when the dot-com bubble burst, many of these companies went under, leaving a trail of financial devastation in their wake. Now it's important to remember that market bubbles are inherently risky. When a bubble bursts, it can lead to a market crash, causing substantial financial losses. For those invested in the podcast market, this could mean a significant loss of capital. The future of the podcast market remains uncertain, but it's clear that there's more to this boom than meets the eye. As we've seen, the podcast market has experienced rapid growth and attracted significant investments, but it may be overvalued. We've journeyed through the rise of podcasts, their growing popularity, and the surge of investments pouring into this sector. However, the crux of our discussion has been to question the sustainability of this growth. Is it a balanced, organic growth, or are we witnessing a market bubble? The implications of this are vast, not just for potential investors, but for the general public as well. Are we on the brink of a podcast bubble burst, or is this just the beginning of an audio revolution? Understanding these dynamics could be key to navigating the future of this booming industry. What do you think about the podcast boom? Is it a market bubble? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more insightful discussions. This is Makoto, signing off.